The Landscapes of Post-War Infrastructure, Culture, Amenity, Heritage and Industry is a research network that is part of the UK RI project Landscape Decisions Towards a New Framework for Using Land Assets. This research builds upon the results of earlier projects about the design of post-war infrastructural landscapes. The network has united an existing multidisciplinary team of academics with new members from government agencies, the private sector, community groups and artists to consider landscapes of post-war infrastructure. We're particularly concerned with the temporal aspects of landscape and the relationships between designed space and its assimilation with perceptibly natural and traditionally agricultural landscapes. How time and use can interact with landscape to create cultural and amenity value, as well as valuable ecologies. How policy helped to foster such conditions. How policy now influences the management and the development of these landscapes. How artistic and creative responses to the landscapes of infrastructure help to narrate their cultural worth. And how to develop means of understanding their seemingly intangible values by comparing and combining research methods in the arts and humanities. The landscapes of infrastructure can now be easily overlooked. However, at their inception, the aesthetics and ecologies of these developments were underwritten by statute and policy. This project is about learning from the past, using collaborative and cross-disciplinary research to inform the future of landscapes, their use, assessment, management and protection. We're specifically interested in the landscapes of post-war infrastructure as they approach maturity and are within a phase of determined change. Their maturity is relevant in three ways: ecologically, with regard patterns of use as sites of amenity, and in relation to their symbolic and iconographic value. The silhouettes of cooling towers and the stark volumetric forms of nuclear reactor buildings became the enduring symbols of power generation of the 20th century. These built objects of the post-war reconstruction programme that are ostensibly functional are cognitively invisible due to this very status. The wider landscape contexts, which were highly considered and no less designed, are even more camouflaged. In some senses, this is testament to the success of the landscape architects, whose task was often to blend or to disguise the impact of functional industrial development. In February 2019, we hosted a conference on the landscape and architecture of post-war British infrastructure, preceded by a two-day international workshop on the same theme. These events highlighted the necessity to investigate the landscapes of infrastructure for several reasons. Firstly, the apparent invisibility of landscape design in mature settings means that sites are being redeveloped or lost before their value is assessed and understood. Secondly, the collaborative processes between disciplines and agencies in the post-war period enabled a specific set of approaches to landscape design that valued society, culture, amenity, and ecology. And finally, the socio-cultural iconography attached to large-scale infrastructural development has only recently begun to be explored. Over the course of the conference and workshop, a number of other uniting themes and questions emerged, most notably around issues of amenity, governance, and space. Amenity, during nationalisation, implied both aesthetic and social concerns and their overlap. In 2020, as decommissioning, redevelopment, acquisitions and mergers change the situations of these landscapes, what are their values as sites of amenity? How have they been used, adopted and adapted by users, and what are the socio-cultural implications of this use? What structures and organisations were formed as products of amenity space, and how does their constitution change as the landscapes are altered? How have industry and ecology coexisted? Are these landscapes worthy of preservation? And if so, is it the landscapes themselves, interior, or the aspects upon these landscapes, exterior, that is of value? In terms of governance, each infrastructural undertaking had its own national body. These bodies were not independent, nor did they exercise complete control within their own domain. For example, the interests of the Central Electricity Generating Board overlapped with the operations of the National Coal Board. As such, how did legislation and government interface with geological, topographic, ecological and social conditions in the production of space? What were the regional and local forces that affected the delivery of Whitehall policy, and how were universal technologies inflected through such power structures? Spatially, the urban extended into the rural and arguably created continuous, unbounded urban fields. What were the spatial forces acting upon the rural? How did they alter the use and perception of landscapes? How did contemporary theories of flows and networks help us to discuss landscapes of post-war infrastructure? And how did the post-war expansion build on previous productive rural landscapes in support of the urban? Our first meeting on the 6th of March 2020, just before lockdown, brought together project partners from a range of backgrounds, including the heritage sector, professional bodies, NGOs and academics. The aim of the meeting was to study various ways in which landscapes are measured and assessed, and to consider the similarities, differences and gaps when using them to study infrastructural landscapes. One aim of the network is to examine how quantitative and qualitative data might come together to help decision making. As architects and landscape architects, we're thinking about this spatially. In drawing together the various methods of assessment into a three-dimensional virtual environment, we imagine that a rich picture of a place can be made from hard facts and a warm heart. By this, we mean a type of contemporary chorography that assimilates all possible data into a single description: film, photos and memories, as well as landform and ecology, and that the description is spatial and temporal. To disseminate the research to a wider audience, a second project, Cooling Down, will complement the network. The follow-on funding will enable the research team to work with filmmakers, film archives, museums and local schools to create interactive games and an immersive filmic experience, both to be premiered at the Blue Dot Festival in 2021.